nation and across our government to build out the processes, procedures, and requirements for that workforce to accomplish our national security ends. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Bill Newhouse to the stage.
That sounded kind of cool. That made me sound sort of important, which I'm not. Look at the slide. Nist, National Institute of Standards and Technology, part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. The director of Nist likes the various directors of Nist, and the current one is Walt Koppen. Previous ones have said, we are the nation's laboratory to enable the commerce of our nation. Many of you obviously are from the Department of Defense and in military and defense roles. We are responsible for enabling all the things that have to happen to make our commerce grow. And that's in cyberspace everything, right? We're now connecting everything. And so the relevance of what I do and the fact it needs to be interdisciplinary and it needs to communicate across sectors and into the defense and into the intelligence businesses is kind of obvious. And it's been a fun ride for me to have started my career at NSA, worked there for 23 years. I was a telecommunications engineer when I started. We put in multiplexers. There was a new thing that was called the router, and it was one synchronous channel on a multiplexer at maybe 64 kilobits per second, and it went from here to here. And somebody knew how to program the autonomous numbers and the system in there, and it was before there was a BGP, and it managed to somehow move data, and there were some very clever young people at NSA who were starting to move collection through it, and the telecommunication people just prayed that the router stayed up and that the multiplexer that supported it stayed up. It was more fun to walk into a building, show up at Menwith Hill, show up at Alice Springs in Australia, and give them better gray phones, the national security, the NSTS phones, because immediately they're like, they sound better. You gave me a better compression module. All this stuff was protected by giant KGs at the time, KG84s, KG81s. So that's like all that technical stuff I used to know is all gone. It's now IPsec, and there's probably no multiplexers anymore. Everything goes through those routers, and everybody's using the same kind of routers all over in our economy. So that's just a little story to get you to kind of say, okay, I know this guy a little bit. But I left NSA 10 years ago and came to Nist, and that was principally because it's 5 miles from my house. And I have 2 kids, and I like to do a lot of things like play volleyball, sing in choirs, and play soccer. And so now I have more time to do that. I'm not riding the metro to Crystal City or to the Pentagon or anything like fun like that. The drawback to a short commute is I have less time to listen to podcasts. And so Security Now, which has been on for a decade, and Steve Gibson and other, Leo Laporte, talk about security in interesting ways. I think if you've listened to that, or the Paul Security podcast, I think is another one. I don't have time to keep up with that stuff, so luckily my job at the NCCOE, which is the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, an interesting place to work. My job there, I have to go out and meet and talk with industry. And then as the Deputy Director of NICE, I've got a new birthmark on my back. You ever seen the Far Side comic where the deer is walking away from the slide and it said, one of the deer says to the other deer, "Bummer of a birthmark, Hal?" And Hal's got a target as part of his fur. And my target is that I will own the NICE framework for the rest of my career because I drafted it into a NIST special publication. I didn't invent it. I didn't come up with all the things in it. But I put my name on the publication that NIST says we'll continue to keep alive and use as we move forward. In this room, would you raise your hand if you've looked at the NICE framework? Would you keep your hand up if you looked at it more than once because you found it useful? Okay, good, cool. All right, so I got some slides to show off. Colonel Warlick had to put together an agenda. And as soon as he wrote it down, and then the team that he's working with here for this AFCEA certs had to print this sometime in advance of this meeting. Is it accurate still? Is this as the framework for this event, is it right? No, right? We know there have been people who've canceled off of it. So you write it down, and as soon as you write it down, it's now obsolete and wrong. And so I'm part of leading a process by which when we document a new framework, somebody's going to tell me immediately, but it doesn't have, it's missing. So we're going to talk about what's in there, what could be in there, and this notion of change. And I've got a million slides. I'm going to bounce all over the place, and I'm going to drive you nuts. I do want to connect you to the rest of the agenda so we can use this as maybe part of the glue that holds all our conversations together for the next 2 days. So this slide here says that we are undergoing an idea of updating this framework. How old is the framework? Anybody want to, just holding up a number of fingers in your hand, how old do you think the framework is? Sandra says it's 10 years old. Okay, that's a pretty good estimate. All right, we got 7 over there. 10, oh, you got 12, okay. So 12 years ago, 2007, the federal government was doing something called the Comprehensive National Cybersecurity Initiative. We weren't telling anybody about it unless you were able to go inside your SCIF. So who knew about CNCI because you were in a SCIF 12 years ago? All right, did you know that there was a nice framework being developed as part of it? There was an Initiative 8 that said we're going to make the federal workforce ready to do all this stuff. And we're going to call them the cybersecurity workforce, and we're going to prepare them. All right, so who are our cybersecurity workforce might be the first question you'd ask if you say you're going to prepare them for this. And who did we know that did cybersecurity? It was kind of our new word, right? We had information security, InfoSec, we had computer security people, we have network security people. Are they cybersecurity people? Probably, right? We have people who acquire stuff. If the person at NSA who's acquiring all the Cisco routers is important to make sure you get the right contract with Cisco to get the right supply chain and make sure you're getting non-counterfeit devices, is that a person in your cybersecurity workforce? Well, back at 12 years ago, somebody started to say, probably, might be a good idea. I wasn't in those rooms 12 years ago. I was sitting next to George Bieber from DOD, who was in those rooms talking about workforce, because he was at the OSD CIO level in a place called the DIAP, Defense Information Information Assurance Program, the DIAP. So you're right, 12 years ago, the framework was started. The first time the public got to see it was in 2012, and we showed it off at one of our nice conferences, which we do annually, and we asked people for comments, and it was in the form of an interactive PDF. And that sounds useful, but it didn't have any sort of document number on it that made you think, is it really the answer? Is this really the thing? And then and then the feedback we got was interesting, right? So there's this new thing that happened around the same time called Cyber Command. And they said, you keep saying IT in this document. Why are you saying IT? It's called cyberspace. Get over it, right? And they were sure they were right because they're the Cyber Command. And who here is from Cyber Command so I can continue to offend? No. So it was, you're right, yes, that is where the world's going, but the language hasn't gone there. So one of the focuses in my conversation with you this morning is that language in this space is really difficult. If I say behavioral indicator, capability indicator, knowledge, skill, ability, assessment, aptitude, proficiency, certification, credential, degree, competition, those are all words. Like they mean something to different people, different ways at different times, and yet we think we're talking about the same stuff. So 2014, the word language, they asked for a little bit of refinement, and my colleagues at DHS, and they now pretty much sit in the new CISA, but at the time they were kind of in a certain part of what was the infrastructure protection part of DHS. They took on the mantle of taking the NICE framework and they turned it into a spreadsheet. So it went from being an interactive PDF, very usable kind of, right? If you know how to run PDFs on your system and you downloaded a free bit of software perhaps from which source, you develop some risk if you do some of these things. Well, the next one was an Excel spreadsheet, and it included the framework all just mapped out as a spreadsheet. It sat there like that for a couple of years, and then eventually we decided, Nist finally got some real funding to make a program office. And I was somebody who was in it all along when I got there. We finally said, we better make that a Nist special pub, because if we do, then we're telling you, as part of this National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, everybody who's part of this, that this is a document that matters, it is central to the conversation. So I haven't even told you what the document looks like, because you told me you've seen it. So this slide says, this year, 2020, is the year that we're going to take on. Oh, I didn't tell you how we got from the spreadsheet to this. So the spreadsheet to this was, yeah, I'm telling you. We said we're going to make it a NIST special pub. That spreadsheet, and we do have it on the NICE framework website, if you go back and look at it, it had 2 categories of work, and there are 7 categories of work in the NICE framework. 2 categories of work that you can't see unless you're in that SCIF that you work in. And that was because the nature of the work was deemed sort of it was deemed as being intelligence work. And so we couldn't share that with the rest of the nation to help them prepare people who could step into your SCIFs when you vetted them properly. So the good news was the other co-authors had been thinking about this problem. So Stephanie Keith and a team of people at the OSD CIO level had been looking at the NICE framework, that spreadsheet, had decided that it needed some extra things to grow. So it took a thing in there, a component called a specialty area, and there were 33 of them at the time, and divided some of them up further. And in doing that, they went and got it cleared so that we could finally show you 2 entire categories of what we deem to be work in cybersecurity, or places where cybersecurity skills are going to be valued. And so I became the person working with them and working with DHS, and we put together a special pub. We put it out for comments in 2016, and then by August of 2017, we got it out in final. I would tell you, as the lead for that paper, I really didn't want to put it out at final at that point because I was still learning what the heck it was. It's so complex in some respects that I wanted to understand why we wrote down that ability statement or why that task statement was still relevant. And frankly, there was no way to easily do that. And Congress had put a little marker, back to the birthmark part of having a bummer of a birthmark. Congress had said, hey, federal government, you're going to assess your workforce by using the NICE framework. Well, the NICE framework existed, as a spreadsheet or a PDF or a draft publication at the time when they put out the law. Oh, I better finish it because nobody wants to code to a draft because then it's not right. Make it final. So the Nist model of publications and building consensus and putting out for comments was kind of rushed in some respects to get it in front of people so that we could start to do this assessment. So now we've got this framework, and we're going to talk a little bit about what's been used for besides assessing if you do cybersecurity work. We're at this point, 2020. We spent the last 2 months asking people about the framework, and the reason we asked, we asked 2 things, and I'll show you those questions, but essentially it's what do you want to see in this thing? What doesn't it do for you? What do you like about it? And then a lot of how are you using it? Because in the meantime, if you look at the title in the paper thing here, it says I'm going to be talking about the Executive Guidance for Cybersecurity Policy and Programs. Well, that was going to be Suzette Kent, and at her levels at the CIO in the executive office, she could tell you all the executive orders in this space. I can talk a little bit about the executive order for America's cybersecurity workforce. And it said in there, hey, we've got this NICE framework. We want to know who's using it. Well, how do I measure use of something that is sort of like using the dictionary? I see that you pulled a verb out of the dictionary. You use Webster's dictionary. Could be my metric. So we started asking questions to get people to help us explore it. We're being pushed by the executive orders. We've been pushed by Congress to make sure this thing exists. And I'm going to show you the ecosystem of areas that we hope it supports. In this time frame, I've left it up a long time so you can read it. We just finished on Monday accepting comments. And then after these next 2 days, you might say, but Bill, I have a new idea. I wish I could submit it. The email address, niceframework@nist.gov, is open to be sent into, and we might tell you it's too late, but give it a shot. If you learn something in the next 2 days that the NICE framework doesn't do and you'd like it to do, or you want to tell me something nice about it, please use niceframework@nist.gov. So we had comments until Monday, and my goal here this morning when I stepped into this role was to kind of give you a flavor of what we learned so far, and I haven't finished reading through all of them yet. So bottom line is I can give you some flavors, and then we're going to spend the rest of the year talking about it. We're going to get people together. We're going to try to build consensus. We're going to put out another draft, and then it'll go out for public comment. So you'll have a couple shots at this as it comes back around at you, and I hope that matters to you. And if it doesn't, I hope there's somebody you know that it matters to that you can help connect us into this process. And then we hope that we'll have something new by the time we get together at the NICE conference in Atlanta, just down the road in next November. All right, too many words here, but the ideas of improvements to the NICE framework. Components that are useful, and I'll show you the components. Least useful, what's missing, key topics, key concepts. So as you try to describe the value of what you do or what you need or the kind of people you want, does the framework support any of that stuff? And then how can it be more useful to a variety of audiences? And these show the audiences, so that middle box, I got a laser. What are my audiences? Employers, employees, education and training providers, learners. And as soon as I say those are them, the good news, I put down et cetera, so I've included everybody in the room. But I do want to know that we do want to know, is it serve you, and do you consider yourself one of those parts of those audiences? And then the idea of aligning to it, how has it helped? And we note that there are other frameworks that are being published, and here, shamelessly, they're all Nist ones because I'm from Nist, and this was a request for comments that we put out, and we got to go this way. This continuing, so we asked about 12 questions. There's 6 on each, and improvements you might make. There's a notion in here of foundational. I'm going to keep pointing to this side. Static ideas, foundational. Is there something that everybody needs to know that we can agree upon? And then the idea is what could be static, and then where do you deal with dynamic content? And so dynamic content would be, hey, now we're starting to talk about artificial intelligence. Now we're talking about 5G, which is, what about the cybersecurity of those things isn't expressed in a document that was written in 2016 based on conversations that happened in 2014 and 2015. So this is a lot of wordy stuff, but the idea was you had a lot of latitude to tell us things about the framework. And then I wanted to throw this up here in the middle of the notion. The next thing I'm going to show you is that we asked about awareness and applications of the NICE framework. But right here, Motorola Solutions is a different Motorola Solutions than it was 25 years ago, but it's a company, and they decided that they were going to do some work and try to describe their staff in terms of the NICE framework. And they made this pitch. The 2 women who led this process convinced higher management, so they advocated for the value of doing it. And the process that they described when they came to the NICE conference is outlined on this slide. So MSI is Motorola Solutions Incorporated. They started by looking at the NICE framework. They found that, the job roles that they have don't map cleanly to the NICE framework. So that's a little bit of friction that maybe the NICE framework, the next version of the NICE framework, could try to clean up for anybody. So if you stare at it and you go, I don't know what that is, but I do know what we call that, we can maybe find a way to build tools that translate that. Look, NICE descriptions were vague, okay? That's kind of an accusation that the framework didn't tell them enough to make them feel confident it's the right thing to be using for everything they do. But they eventually started diving in, and when they looked at the knowledge, skill, and ability statements, it started to make a little more sense. They reference at the bottom here, NICS. NICS, is, if you Google that, is a tool, a structure area of a DHS workforce place website. And in there, they've got an instantiation of the NICE framework that's much more usable than an interactive PDF or a spreadsheet or a Nist publication in the form of a PDF. So just to show you that there are people who have tried to use the framework, and this doesn't express that they got past this challenge and have really made some good progress. And they think that by talking about their staff in terms of this, they're going to be more prepared to tell their customers that they can support the work they need to do. They can deal with the cyber risks that they already experience as a company, as a big enterprise. Moving forward. And you guys know you can do that Ask Me certs at gmail.com, and the big voice from the back will be asking questions of me of your questions. So there it is. Just remember that you can pop that up anytime. So then, awareness of the framework is on this one. Why do we need awareness of a framework? I'd like you to believe that the framework is the glue that holds all your conversations together. And if that's true, I want you to know about it, and then I want to make it easy for you to use it. And I keep saying me and I, but I really mean all of us, okay? So that's the ego in me, and that's the bummer of the birthmark part of my life. But frankly, when I'm easy to find, because I work in Rockville, Maryland, right outside of D.C., and my name's on the publication. If people are using it, we want to know how well it's going for them. If you're curious to hear some examples of it, we have an e-newsletter, and it's got a lot of cool articles about how school systems and people and companies are using the NICE framework already. So the whole winter issue that just came out this earlier this week is on this topic space. So if you want to do reading at home, you can do that. Continuing in the idea, this idea of tools, resources, or technical support, modest funding means that we haven't built awesome tools around the concepts that are in the framework. So it's not as easy to use the framework as it is to shop on Amazon. I go to Amazon and I say I'm interested in a technology, right? I say I want to find a router that does 802.11g, and it'll tell me, okay, here's some, and then it'll say some people who've looked at that same thing also looked at these things. That could be helpful to you, right? If you're doing cyber defense and you went into some document like the NICE framework, wouldn't it be kind of nice to say, hey, when the Army Cyber Command went into the document, they also started to look at these other resources, these other things, this class, this training provider. They did all these things. So you have a little bit of maybe reputational being able to pull and stay in part of a journey as you get into that. So the tools have never, ever really been developed until after the publication was put out, and we're still lagging in that space. And so the idea of what we can do to improve is important. So this is a lot to try to figure out how to digest into a framework that not everybody has even tried to use. So how much do we want to change? Kind of backward compatibility has always been one of the biggest challenges in any technology implementation. If we're backward compatible, it means we're backward compatible to the vulnerabilities in that technology. We may be backward compatible in a framework to the struggles to understand it and make it usable by the people we'd like to have use it. All right, jumping ahead, or jumping into the ecosystem. NICE thinks it's trying to do these things with you as part of it, with lots of different folks. We want to get the idea of accelerating learning and skills development is based on the fact that there's lots of data that says there's open jobs. So if we have open jobs, let's get people into them as fast as possible. The nurturing a diverse learning community, if we keep going to the same wells all the time and the wells are tainted or the wells aren't perfect or the wells just have limitations, we're gonna suffer from just being on that single path towards supply chain of thinking, supply chain of people. And so we've got the idea of building and strengthening across a full ecosystem. And then guide career development and workforce planning. Bring that one up because that's where we promised that we would continue to do this NICE framework thing together. And so as we move forward, what do we need to do to keep this thing relevant is what's happening in 2020. I'm going to ask in the back, has anybody asked a cool question that you want to shout out at this point? I say a lot of stuff, and I want to engage you guys a little bit. So any questions that have popped up, you're going to read off the mic?
Yes, we are. White one.
So how does the NICE framework interface with cybersecurity educators along with schools, colleges, and universities? It's about the section you're about to get into.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So how, you heard the question, how does it integrate? Okay. Yes, that's the answer. No. It integrates and that is, I'll try to give you some examples. And the good news is some of your exhibitors are the answers. Ask them that question again later. How does what you're showing me integrate? How did the NICE framework help you get to the confidence that you're in the right place? How are you part of a conversation that's useful? This is a conversation space. 2 years ago when I was here, and I couldn't be here last year because my agency didn't have funding and I wasn't allowed to travel, so I didn't get to join you. I had planned to be here. But 2 years ago I said we were going to establish public working groups. And these are the subgroups within that public working group structure. And it means every month, each of these 6 groups meets and spends an hour listening to people say interesting things, challenge each other, take on small projects that are for the greater good. And so the concept of apprenticeships, that is adding diversity into our space of people can get into this career field without necessarily having to go and get a full degree. They can start with an apprenticeship. Many apprenticeships include getting a degree, so there's some value. There's a lot to talk about in that space. Collegiate as a subgroup. What do the higher education schools need to be doing in helping to support our needs for people with cybersecurity skills and cyber skills to exist in the workforces we need? Competitions. There's good examples in the exhibit floor, and the fact that you can maybe take a side tour from 10 to 2 and watch middle schoolers and high schoolers play the capture the flag thing. Watch how excited they get. Watch how interested they are. Turns out people have been funding, and many of you may be involved in Cyber Patriot or coaching or mentoring, and you've seen the excitement of watching students at that age get interested in this field, get interested in coding, get interested in risk, get interested in solving problems. Well, we can use competitions for your existing workforce. We can use them in lots of different ways, and so there's a nice set of things to learn from competitions, and it could help us answer some of those assessment questions and aptitude things. Can we see if people might be, that they are fired up in this space? And we know that within the bigger competitions, Cyber Patriot or the CCDC, that the sponsors watch the winners and often offer them jobs or internships or access into being part of their workforce, and it's pretty exciting. K through 12. Is part of the conversation, and it's a huge part of the conversation, and that's the question, sort of how. Well, how much room do we have to add our thoughts, all these cybersecurity skills and abilities and competencies that we'd like people to have into a curriculum that's already pretty full, that isn't managed from one place, that is so diverse across our nation? Those are tactics. Glenn Hernandez, raise your hand. Glenn over here is on the AFCEA Cyber Committee, and he's diving headfirst into K-12, recognizing that the big linchpin in his mind is that if we don't train the teachers and the counselors who are involved with K-12 students, then we're never going to quite get there. And so there's lots of little tactics, big tactics, to train all the teachers, that can be taken on at the K-12 level, providing them resources. So for competitions, people talk about running them on cyber ranges sometimes, right? Do you have a range here at the Georgia Cyber Center? I bet you do. If you don't, you're probably about to get one. Does your school have one? Does your school system have one? Does your state have one? The state of Virginia has a big one that they offer up for the high schools and the middle schools to use. That same concept of your range can be something that offers the ability to do anything in your K-12 level. So there's a tactic of building something that lets you play and safely enable students to engage with cyberspace in a good way. Training and certifications, putting these two words together means it's a bit of a broad topic, but certifications have been a big part of this space. 8570 defined information assurance certifications, and it had levels, and it was pretty, it created an industry space in my mind. If I look at it, it drove people to those certifications, and it drove training providers to provide instructions so you could pass those tests. We haven't necessarily modernized that language to keep up in the same prescriptive manner. And Nist is a non-regulatory agency, so I'll admit that I tend to stand 10 feet away from that one because I don't want to pick the winner. I want to say you're all my best friends, and we love all the babies. But that's tricky, but a subgroup can have a conversation and offer up, well, what is the structure by which we can share the certifications that matter and do it in a uniform way that's fair? And we haven't quite gotten there yet, to be able to show that. And then in the training space, what are the different learning methods and training styles, and how long do you need to do something? I sat on an airplane next to a guy yesterday who's a staff sergeant in the Air Force, and he's coming down here to spend 3 months learning about SATCOM. Is 3 months the right time to learn about SATCOM? When I was doing SATCOM, we had to know how to program up the modems that did all that stuff. Now I'm pretty sure you just say go, and the modem makes something aim, and it does it all pretty smart for you. So why does he need 3 months? Well, somebody's decided that's the right amount of time. Do we have enough background in our space now to know how long training should be? How much time? Are you guys thinking you're here for 2 days to get training, to learn everything? It's an interesting, I'm asking silly questions sometimes, but training and certifications is a conversation. And then workforce management. One of the big outputs from this subgroup is a space to say, hey, cybersecurity matters for everyone. It's kind of patently obvious, I think, to this audience, right? We want everybody to know that risk is there and inherent in everything you do. Turns out there are still people who that's a message that's new to them. So I didn't answer the question perfectly, but I think I give you a tactic by which if you come join us in these conversations, you will find people who can give you an answer that connects with your role and your interests. All right. I'm not going to spend time telling you what's in the framework. It's this stuff. But I do want to say it's central to the conversation. The words we can start to argue about as we do the update. The boxes I told you that were not described before, collect and operate and analyze, are based on the ability to do Title 18 and Title 50 stuff, the intelligence work. But if we describe it to the rest of our nation, then we have an opportunity to benefit from a pipeline of students. Cool. The NICE framework, as an eye chart, this is the NICE framework, the left side being categories, the middle big specialty areas, and then I put in the brackets the number of work roles for each of those specialty areas. So as we turn it into a NIST special pub, we added some refinement to the specialty areas, and then we further broke those down into work roles. And you won't be able to discern what's right or wrong about this looking at it, but you'll recognize some of the words, and then some of the other words you'll be like, that's kind of wonky, I don't know what that means. Well, as we evolve it, we want to make sure that the language marries with every sector we're talking to, and that's kind of a big challenge. and I'm trying to see if I can still see it in here. We used to have ComSec is one of the work roles, and I know what a ComSec custodian is because I worked at NSA, and I've seen paper tapes, and we pull through and go through the cryptos. But is a ComSec custodian at Bank of America? Well, I might be surprised. They probably have some encrypting devices that do actually have keys in them, and they manage their keys probably with electronic devices, but more likely it's going to be somebody who's like the PKI manager, right? Let's make sure our public key infrastructure is working properly. Let's make sure if we need to sign our data so that people know it's the valid data, that it's cryptographically bound. Well, that should be in here somewhere. I mean, I can dive into any one of these specialty areas, and many of you work in these specialty areas. This isn't meant to say you work in only one of these. Okay? Those brackets that say there's 2 work roles doesn't mean we're going to say you're only a work role. You're only in this work role. The idea is this describes the potential for all the work you do, and if you're at a big place, you might be given one work role, but if you're at a small company, you might be asked to understand, at least have high-level knowledge of every work role so that you can assess something about the risk you're taking on as you procure things like cloud services. It breaks down. The key thing to note here is 3352 and greater than 2150. So there's over 2,150 KSAs and tasks. Is that manageable if you're pulling it out of a PDF? Not so much, right? It needs to be fed to you through a tool that affirms that you're in the right space, that you're talking about the right kind of work. Is this the answer where you go to get how do I do software development? No, it says software development matters. It says you should know some stuff, but if you really want to be good at secure software or software assurance as a topic, you might go to Carnegie Mellon and borrow the curriculum that was developed with the Software Engineering Institute with DHS grant money and use that as your curriculum. The NICE framework doesn't really have those jump-off points documented very well. And trying to do so is tricky because some of those jump-off points will be to commercial providers, and then I'm picking winners. So the conversation that we can have back in those public working groups, anybody can stand up and say, I've got one, and I believe it's right. Right now, we don't have a way to say, NICE at Nist says you're right. We say you're using the NICE framework, you're in the right conversation space. Thank you. That's as far as I'm able to go. If you're from the DoD, don't tell them I borrowed their slide. But this is important. This is one of the huge confusion spaces you're going to have about the NICE framework is that doesn't say NICE framework. It looks it shows the NICE framework in a box over there in small font, and it says there's this thing called the JCT and CNS. Who knows what that is? Some of you do, because it's about training and things. And they've got a version of, they've got their own workforce. You guys in the DoD have a cyberspace workforce framework, and the NICE framework is aimed at everybody who's not you guys, so that the conversation can continue outside the DoD in a cohesive manner. So I've got a responsibility, and these folks are co-authors of the document, to keep up with their work, to know that they've created new work roles, some of which you have to go into a SCIF to see, to know when they want to add another work role so that I can continue to rationalize it to the rest of our economy, to a whole sector of folks. I meant to say this earlier. There's a whole space that the NICE framework, because it looked like it was focused at IT. It looked like it was focused at your desktop computers and your data centers, and it looked like it's focused at your mobile devices that you use as a regular employee of a company that just spends time thinking about things or has to do missions in the DoD sense. But it didn't necessarily make anybody who does industrial control systems, cyber-physical systems, any of those areas of advanced manufacturing who are now fully connected into cyberspace and buying technologies that are very much similar to the IT technologies to move data around within their factory floors or in their process, in their industrial spaces. They didn't see themselves in this NICE framework because we didn't really write their words down. So as we move forward, and the DoD is certainly on top of knowing that at their bases you've got lots of things that are connected into cyberspace you need to worry about the ability for others to connect with and to mess with. Well, we need to keep the synchronization between any framework like this and the NICE framework, and that's a promise that we make and a challenge to address. And so the idea that the DCW has been adapted at the national level. The NICE framework is a public instantiation of everything that we can and are able to say about the DCWF. The folks in policy offices in the Pentagon can tell you stuff like you have to and that you shall and all that around the DCWF. I won't do that with a nice framework, but you can still get cranky with me because other people will make you do stuff with it that I didn't expect either, like assess your workforce at a federal level. Otherwise, it's just kind of voluntary adoption for me on the nice framework side. So guys, feel free to interrupt with a cool question if you come up, if you think Bill needs to hear this question now. Otherwise, I continue forward. And then give me a shout from on high about, Bill, you're done. Finish now, because I got way too many slides.
Got 10 minutes.
10 minutes, all right. So everything I've said has used the word cybersecurity. I work in an initiative that cleverly is called the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. Well, that's nice. Nice. I'm a nice guy. I've been a nice guy for almost 10 years. But it leaves off what? Workforce. It leaves off training. It leaves off all these other words that are part of the ecosystem. It keeps saying cybersecurity. I need to justify sometimes that we exist and that we matter and you should come talk to us. So, we hold on to words that connect with other words that get you money and things like that. And cybersecurity has been the word. But the DoD in 8140 did come in and say, hey, we're going to define the cybersecurity workforce differently. We're not even calling it cybersecurity. Look, there's no security. Where's security? Right in the middle, green. It's smaller. There's an intelligence workforce. There's an effects workforce. There's a cyber IT workforce. I believe there's a declaration that if you do IT for the military, you're now in the cyber IT workforce. I don't know if it's been officially, anybody who does IT and now knows they're a cyber IT person? Is that, am I saying truths here? These are new words that came out just as we were publishing it in 2017, and I dodged them really, really carefully in 2017. I don't think I can dodge them anymore as a leader of a consensus-based document. So the word cyber used to be just a prefix, and now it is our word. And so to rationalize what it means from a DoD perspective, well, what would this mean to a bank? What would this, not much, but we can probably find a way to put in that Amazon tool that when the DoD comes to look for cyber IT workforce, they are in the same space as, and that kind of comes from this translator. Small words, the words like data analyst and R&D specialist, those are the work roles in the NICE framework, so there should be 52 on this page. And my friends have said, look, you've got IT people over there, you got, the cybersecurity, that green box, if I go back, remember the green box was that one, going forward, the orange box, and the yellow box. And I've had people say, everything in the yellow box you don't need to know unless you're in the IC or the DoD. Then I've had people from JP Morgan Chase say, no, we care about that stuff. We actually have to do that stuff. And the critical infrastructure protecting people want to know what does it mean to be an all-source analyst. Well, they might have somebody who does all the things a DoD all-source analyst does, but they have people who do actions within that structure that are defined in the NICE framework. So there's a lot of complexity in describing that. We believe the NICE framework is central to all this stuff. Do you agree? Probably, right? And then the hard part is actually measuring what's been done. That these things help. I can tell you that we've done some idea, who is in the workforce? Well, human capital planning, is that the recruitment, retention, and retaining part? Sure, then there have been some updates to strategies. But what I want to say is the NICE framework gives you the central language that lets you, if you're moving from one of these communities to the other, the tasking done in here, that you can bring with you the data and the experiences you've learned, because it starts to let us have standardized words and languages. Tools. This is a screenshot of the NICS portal, and the nice thing is I can actually just throw in a keyword. So if I'm like, does the NICE framework have anything in there about adversaries or adversarial thinking or the word adversary? I can throw it into a keyword description and quickly convince myself, okay, at least it has something in there. And if somebody said, well, how many times does it need to be in there? Should adversarial be in this framework 100 times? Probably, because that's really what the space we're worried about with risk. But if I write it once, it's right too. So this, just showing this off gives you the ability to look at the NICE framework in ways you might not have known you could do. Ooh, sorry, I've introduced a whole new thing that was in an old framework. Simpler language, competencies in the light-colored columns. 60 of them. Many of them are technical. Many smaller numbers over in what I call operational or context to the workspace you're in. Professional, those are the often called soft skills or the life skills you need to bring. And then potentially the idea that some of these are leadership competencies. Look at the bottom green box. It's hard to see for some of you, but every KSA in the NICE framework was mapped to one of these 60. One KSA, one competency. So I think, and many people who helped me develop these thoughts, and we're going to put it into the NICE framework, when you're having a one-on-one conversation with somebody about their job this year, how they're performing, what they need to do next year, you might say, we're going to focus next year on your ability to do systems testing and evaluation. And then if somebody says, well, what do you mean by that? Okay, well, grab that, and you can then look at the Ks and the Ss and the As that are assigned to it and go, okay, it says you should have knowledge of these things. It says you should be able to demonstrate these skills. And that's what a competency is actually demonstrating that you can execute the skills. So it lets you get there faster than trying to figure out which work role do I start with. It lets you come in at a different angle. And we think it simplifies the conversation. We think it's more natural language kind of conversations. Now let's start the argument about what's a competency and why'd you pick these. There's a whole pedigree about where some of these came from. Many of them were in a 2014 version of the NICE framework. We didn't reaffirm them in the NIST special pub. We're going to do so now in 2020. And so I think this is the fun place to play, but I got to explain to you how to use it. Again, one more tool that needs to be built to make this explain better. All right, and then really important for me at NIST and for you potentially depending on your role is that NIST was part of a adoption executive order way back in 2012 or 2013 said, please develop a framework for critical infrastructure protection. And it has been out for a couple years. It's in its second version now. And it is the circle there with identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. And each of those has categories of things that happen within those 5 functions, and then subcategories, 108 of them. And essentially, when you look at those subcategories, it's implied to you or being told to you what you need to worry about and potentially tactics. How? Like, what do you if I need to know where all my assets are, it's affirming that that's something you need to do. It doesn't answer who has the skills to let you do that. And we haven't finished connecting them in a way that would make it easy for you to jump off I'm worried about risk. I've been told that I need to identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. Who can do it? Can I look quickly and see that Sally has the requisite competencies that makes me feel I can get started in the process of doing protect for my critical infrastructure space, for my cyberspace. So just wanted to show you the categories so you can kind of get these words kind of repeat. Well, awareness and training. Oh, that's a protect function? What does that mean? Why? This connects you with 853, which is a NIST publication on security and privacy controls. Building a language just like Amazon does when you buy a vacuum cleaner to say you could also buy vacuum cleaner bags from these 12 vendors. Well, wouldn't it be nice to have an affirmation that when we're talking about risk assessment, there's a whole bunch of places that you could look at that are NIST and DoD joint pubs now, and that now we're going to tell you something about the people who do risk assessment and are in the NICE framework. And by example, the protect function, category of identify, management, and access control, or sometimes this can be identities and credentials access management, but in this case, this is the exact wording on the left from the NIST framework. And then the NICE framework, we have 4 letters, they both start with N to describe these frameworks. But taking that identities and credentials are issued, managed, revoked. I mean, this is my PIV card, your CAC card, the second C is CAC, is card. So your common access card in the DoD, somebody has to make sure this is happening. Well, we kind of believe that probably people who work in the work role of system administration and potentially product support managers. So 2 minutes. And I'll shut up so we can take some questions. But this is a growth area that the framework hasn't done yet. So question, you guys ready back there?
So one of the many challenges in cybersecurity is to understand improved outcomes, not just improved process. How would you know that the use of the framework leads to better outcomes? And the second part is it'll be important and necessary to update this on a regular basis. So how often is that going to happen?
Yeah, I'll answer the second one. This is if I told you August 2017 was when we said the framework was done as of that point, and we're now in 2020, that's about 2.5 years. So we're kind of looking at a 3-year cycle on updating. But I didn't get to say it too carefully yet, is what could be the core static content? Describe something just enough so you know that you're the horseshoes model, you're in the game, you know where you are. And then off over here, create a more dynamic database that lets us ingest the new articles of, the new things. Every day I can read a research paper or a media thing that says there's something that just happened in cyberspace that caused a problem, that cybersecurity failed us, and potentially turn that into a knowledge statement, and potentially turn that into a skill statement. So the idea of then, how do you know if you've made progress because you've touched the nice framework? That is right on top of the metrics question that not just workforce people have struggled to answer, but everybody, right? How do you, the commander who was up here, the general before me, said 900 kids, right? He started talking about what happened in the last 2 days. Is 900 kids more than last year? I think he said yes, it is. Is 900 kids enough? We don't have easy ways to express that if you invite students to do these things, it's made a difference because that's a longitudinal study. And you've really got to design sort of what you're going to measure. So I think the framework can give you some of the language to help you think about that, but it doesn't give you the answers. You've got to locally get those answers for yourself and then kind of grow the metrics to see if it matters.
How do you rationalize the need for speed with what appears to be a very deliberate process?
Yeah, I'm consistently my whole career, I feel like I don't keep up, and I say government doesn't keep up. If I do a special pub and we put it out for comment, 60 days, then we adjudicate comments and then we document it. All that time, new skills and abilities and knowledge statements could be developed and how to ingest them. So I think the answer of developing a dynamic content storage area and then let that be, it doesn't have to be the exact answer, but it might be the answer you need because of the sector you're in and the area of concern you're most in. That's a tool I'd like to see built because then it helps us keep up. If we keep saying this is the whole corpus and it takes us 3 years to get there, we're always going to be behind. It was like me saying that this document is already out of date because people canceled. I don't want to hold this up and say this is the nice framework. I want to hold up an online cyberspace connected tool that lets you make progress. And don't look at the framework for the answers. Look at the framework to tell you you're in the right ballpark. The answers, it'll firm your answers. If you don't have any clue, it'll give you some answers. It helps the clueless. The people who have a clue just want to make sure the framework matches what they're doing, and then if they go beyond it, that's something we need to be able to quickly say.
That was our final question for Mr. Newhouse. We got several good questions here. Thank you, Oz.